Percy Bysshe Shelley was a British poet. He was a radical thinker who urged the working class to revolt against exploitation through non-violent means. His poetry and writings often reflect that. In fact, he wrote an article on atheism, a subject considered taboo in those times. He was expelled from Oxford University for writing that. Ozymandias is one of Shelley's most famous poems. It is a sonnet, which is a 14-line poem. There's an interesting story about how Shelley was inspired to write this poem. One evening, Shelley and his friend Horace Smith were discussing Napoleon's conquest of Egypt. They talked about the statue of Ozymandias, an Egyptian ruler who was also known as Ramses II. Their conversation led to a competition between them, and they both decided to write a poem on this statue. Both poems tell the same story. However, Shelley's poem is more popular. I met a traveller from an antique land who said, "Two vast and trunkless legs of stone stand in the desert. Near them on the sand, half sunk, a shattered visage lies, whose frown and wrinkled lip and sneer of cold command tell that his sculptor well those passions read, which yet survive. Stamped on these lifeless things, the hand that mocked them and the heart that fed. And on the pedestal these words appear, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair. Nothing beside remains. Round the decay of that colossal wreck, boundless and bare, the lone and level sands stretch far away." Here's a brief summary of the poem Ozymandias by Percy Bysshe Shelley. The narrator of the poem meets a traveller from an ancient land. The traveller talks about a massive statue which lies shattered in the desert. What remains of the statue are its two huge legs without an upper body. The shattered face of the statue is partially buried in the sand nearby. There is a frown on the face, and the expression is cold, commanding, and arrogant. The emotions on the face are so realistic and detailed that it is clear the sculptor had an acute understanding of the king. The face chiseled by the sculptor still survives in that barren land. On the pedestal of the statue is an inscription by the king. The king introduces himself as Ozymandias, the king of all kings. The inscription further claims that even the mightiest men will look at the king's achievements and despair that they have achieved nothing compared to the king. Now, the once mighty statue lies in ruins. There is nothing around except vast stretches of sand. There are three speakers in the poem. In the beginning, we hear briefly the voice of the narrator, who introduces the traveller from an ancient land. The traveller then takes over and describes the statue of a king lying in the desert. He tells us what the inscription on the statue says. While the traveller quotes the words on the inscription, the words really belong to the king, Ozymandias. So in a way, the king is the third speaker in this poem. The poem tells us that kings and their kingdoms do not last forever. The arrogance of powerful rulers is reduced to nothing with the passing of time. Works of art, however, outlive tyrannical rulers. The poem tells us that with the passage of time, even the greatest of rulers die and the empires they build collapse. The lines, "Nothing beside remains, round the decay of that colossal wreck," tells us that even a powerful ruler like Ozymandias and his political regime perish. All that remains is a crumbling statue lying forgotten in a desert. Another theme is pride. The traveller in the poem mentions the words inscribed on the pedestal. My name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. "Look upon my works, ye mighty, and despair." These words present Ozymandias as a king who is proud and boastful of his achievements. The words indicate the greatness and power of the ruler. However, this is in complete contrast to the present state of the statue. The statue is in ruins and nobody seems to care about it. The poem also highlights how art withstands the test of time. The realistic and detailed expressions on the face of the statue are a proof of the sculptor's mastery, which yet survive, stamped on these lifeless things. It is a sculptor's skill which gave life to a piece of stone and offered a glimpse of the ruler's power. The glory of the ruler has faded, but the sculptor's art is still alive. Shelley has used various figures of speech. One of them is irony. The poem presents an ironical situation. For example, the words on the pedestal indicate the power of the king and the greatness of his works. However, these lines sound ironical when we consider that nothing exists besides the king's statue. Even the statue is decaying and a colossal wreck. Shelley has used alliterations in the poem. For example, the repetition of the syllables B in boundless and bare, L in lone and level, and S in sands stretch create an image of an isolated, barren desert where nothing exists except the ruins of a forgotten statue. The poet has also made use of synecdoche in the line, "The hand that mocked them and the heart that fed." The hand and the heart are examples of synecdoche, where a part has been used to represent a person. The hand could refer to the sculptor, who mocked or copied the king's expressions perfectly. It could also refer to the king, who ruled with an oppressive hand and ill-treated his people. The heart that fed can have several meanings. One interpretation is that it refers to the sculptor whose compassion and morality still live in the otherwise lifeless head. It could also refer to the king's heart that fueled the sculptor's passion, which enabled him to carve such a perfect piece in stone.